Good afternoon and welcome to the World Media Group webinar. I am Alex Delamain, President of the World Media Group and Global Client Partner at The Economist. This is the third webinar in our Smart Briefing series, and I'm delighted to report we've connected with over 1,000 people today from all over the world, from some countries that you'd expect and others that might surprise you, like Latvia, Mauritius, Kenya, Panama. So welcome to you all. Today's webinar is entitled Rebooting Your Brand or Business in the Post-COVID-19 World. What's next for businesses and brands? How can they survive and evolve as we come out of this human crisis into a world challenged by economic recovery? Today's panel is very well equipped to lead this conversation and answering our questions and yours. Our chair today is Damien Douglas, Managing Director of Time EMEA, who will pick these brilliant minds and help us better understand what lies ahead. We promise to leave plenty of time for questions, and in fact our panel has generously agreed to answer any questions that we don't have time to answer in the live broadcast, so bear that in mind. If you're posting anything on Twitter or LinkedIn, use hashtag WMG What's Next for Brands. And with that, I pass you over to Damien.
Well, thanks, Alex. Again, thank you to everybody on the panel for making time today. That's great. Before we get started, I want to bring everybody's attention to kind of two things. One, we're going to be running a live poll throughout today's conversation to get a sense of how you are all feeling about the second half of the year and the current environment as it relates to our industry. And then secondly, prior to this, we've been running a LinkedIn poll just as a sentiment check to see how positive people are feeling about the second half of this year. Now, that came back 60% positive, and I know our panel have some thoughts around how positive they're feeling, so we'll get stuck into that. But that led me into working out how to frame today's conversation and what to look for. I started looking in two areas. The first being the news cycle, and then the second being what the markets are telling us. So looking at the news cycle, it has us in a period of economic recovery. Businesses are starting to talk about reopening, and we're discussing the easing of lockdown. So positive. The second being the markets. The markets have been in slow recovery since kind of mid-April with a blip here and there. So they have us in a period of progression also. There is a fragility that exists that we've experienced across the last week or so. And every recent crisis, whether that be the dot-com bubble or the financial crisis in 2008, was linked to an economic cycle. It didn't have to deal with the degree of mortality that we've seen or mass unemployment on such a scale. Both of these things deliver an added layer of complexity, and previous playbooks that we might have looked to are merely indicative. The notion that clients that spend through the crisis come out stronger is one that we all felt was oversimplistic when we discussed this last week. And each brand will find its own way at its own pace. And those things will be linked back into two things: the value that they offer their consumer and clients, and the utility that they bring at any given point. So kind of reframing the discussion slightly, we'll look at how you build or rebuild brand equity through a period of significant disruption. And as Alex said, great panel to discuss. So let me whip through. They're going to have to forgive me for abbreviating their bios because they were so experienced. So Philippa Layton-Jones, who's Editorial Director Innovation at the Wall Street Journal. Her role is helping clients. Her role is the editorial lead of The Trust, an intelligence-led creative consultancy advising the world's best-known brands on storytelling and positioning. In her role in innovation, she's looking at the next wave of media technology and its impact on storytelling for brands. So thank you, Philippa. Gordana Buccisano, who's EVP Global Transformation at Havas, and her role is to help clients navigate change, unlock growth, and drive digital transformation by creating future-focused strategies. Her partner is Louisa Lauren, who is VP and CMO and Head of Business Development at Maersk. Louisa, amongst many other things, has been at the heart of Maersk's digital transformation and how this translates to its 80,000 plus customers. And lastly, we've got David Weldon, who's Vice President at the WFA, former CMO at RBS, with over 35 years of experience that started at Saatchi. He's had leadership roles through Vodafone, Barclays, and RBS. So everyone is well equipped to contribute, which should make my role relatively straightforward. I wanted to start the conversation with Louisa, as she is the client on the panel. Louisa, Maersk are and have been so instrumental to the global supply chain for a long time. Yet they're a brand that many are unfamiliar with when you compare them to FedEx or DHL. So when you embarked on a brand building journey, you probably didn't anticipate COVID. And I just wanted to get a sense as to how you started that process, and then the impact of the last 3 months, and what action you've taken, taken around this period.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Damien, and thank you for having me on the panel. I joined Maersk just about 6 years ago, and I think at that point in time, I was exactly at that moment that you were describing there. Everyone had seen the containers around the world, but didn't really know the impact. And I think there is an awareness of companies of this size where Maersk covers just about a fourth of world's global trade, yet very few people have real affinity to it. And I joined really with the premise of understanding how could Maersk become more valuable, and how could someone that was so asset driven actually become more customer focused and therefore create both value and utility for customers. Mm-hmm. That's been a journey we've been on, and I could spend hours on that, and don't worry, I won't take that much time on it, but I think it's been really, really interesting to see how a decision made back in 2016 and a rewiring of a company to become customer centric has really, really proved its worth during COVID. Because at this point in time, and also unfortunately we a few years back had a cyber attack, it is the ability to understand your customers and put together value propositions and solutions to match their needs that actually enables you to be successful. So during COVID, it has been business management for us, not crisis management, and that is based on a premise of becoming customer centric and digitizing our engagements. So I'm definitely not undermining the impact of COVID, but I think our business continuity plans were such that within 24 hours we were up and running, and we've only had one site around the world that's had 24 hours down. And we are proud that we are playing a greater role in solving our customer supply chain challenges, where they are put in positions where they can simply not, for instance, get rid of their goods, and we can come with solutions such as warehousing instead of delivery.
Yeah. There is a quick question on the cyber attack. Would you say the cyber attack kind of reshaped your business slightly, or refocused your business slightly, and that's helped you through the last 3 months?
Yeah, well, for sure it has. I mean, again, something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but it actually came at the point in time where we, as a leadership team, had just made the decision on the new strategy of Maersk and working to connect and simplify our customer supply chain. And the cyber attack, where you suddenly for 10 days have to manage a fourth of global trade without a laptop, without an IP telephone working, and you have to call down to the terminal and say, can you please make sure that the world's leading brands containers are parked in the right locations, because we have a responsibility to find to keep the wheels turning of global trade. For sure, it was an acceleration and a reality check, and I think that's what the world is getting right now. And that's why those who have digitized their business and had more of an agile ear to what the customers need, I'm not saying we're in a safe place, but we're able to respond to the situation that's going on right now and be more meaningful and valuable with what we have to bring.
I think that notion of accelerated digital transformation is something that you read about everybody having experienced in the last 3 months. We've been forced to do things more innovatively now than we were 3 months ago, and things that we would have probably put off for 6 to 12 months, which I think can be a positive thing we take out of this moving forward. Gordana, you've worked closely with Louisa over the last 12, 18 months. How has your role as agency changed specifically in the last 3 to 4 months? What are you advising Louisa to do and clients that sit, outside Louisa throughout your agency group?
Well, I'm glad that I'm sitting on the same panel with my lovely client here, and it's been a great journey that we've been on. That's what Louisa described as a full digital transformation of the Maersk. I like how she actually very nicely articulated it. I think last 3 months has been all about really business management for Maersk, and we therefore position ourselves as their trusted advisor to help them actually to achieve their KPIs during this very challenging time. So the theme of our relationships, if I am to summarize it well, is really it's more than a media agency, because we support Maersk in other areas as an agency group. And to be honest with you, I don't think that has changed throughout the COVID. So we kind of recommended adjustments in order to ensure that both long-term brand objectives, repositioning Maersk as end-to-end logistic provider, but also focusing on short-term commercial objectives, which we knew what they were. Therefore, our job really was to advise them and to make sure that we together hit those targets. So essentially, it was really to support the whole digital transformation of the Maersk, touching every aspect of the digital experience, from customer journey to segment targeting and a constant optimization. Once when you have that framework, in whichever circumstances you operate, COVID or non-COVID, it's about really having an agile mindset, being able to adjust. So we haven't really advised Maersk, we haven't recommended to reduce the brand investment, for example, in the expense of dialing up direct response campaigns, simply due to the fact that Maersk are at the center of the global supply chain. So the visibility at this time was actually the key. But what we have done on the back of that is recommended accurate phasing and geographical adjustments with our performance investment. And obviously, throughout all this journey, providing the meaningful media experience, which is what our customers expect.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how significant, shipping is to the supply chain. I read somewhere over 90% of goods still travel overseas. So when you think about first line responders, you still need those lanes open and agile to supply what people have been going through for the last 3 or 4 months. The key notion, and David and I touched on it in our conversation last week, was thinking around shorter cycles. When you don't have visibility beyond the next 3 to 4 months, really, you've got to look at the next 3 to 4 months and work out how your brand can make a difference now, rather than where we are in September, October. And I think again that's widely talked about for sure. So David, I just want to touch on you, because your career is so diverse, and at stages you've been giving advice, and at stages you've been taking actions. So first question, what do you look for in brand behaviors during the times that we've just experienced? And then, how do you build consumer preference against, what are quite challenging economics?
Well, I mean, these will be words that everybody's getting possibly bored with. The authenticity and a brand knowing what it is and what it does and doing it in the right way with the right tone, I think, is the key to this. And actually, just to touch on the spending investment point, there are those companies, of course, that think that marketing is a discretionary spend and that will have reached for the red pen because they need to save costs. And that's the short-termist view. All of the data from all of the previous recessions, all the way back to the Great Depression, says that you keep investing, your brand will emerge stronger. I think that's still true. However, this is not a recession like one we've ever seen before. So understanding where your people are, and having left the bank, I know how important employee engagement is, how important it is to engage with the front line, how important that service is, understanding where they are, taking care of them, and then taking care of your customers and understanding them is absolutely crucial. That's a bit tricky, and let's touch on a difficult thing here. There are some research companies that, because of their short-termism, have furloughed their staff. So people are picking up the phone going, I need to do this, I need to do it now, and it can't be done. So I think this is a tricky circumstance, but the short answer is great brands will always keep doing what they do well and understand the market circumstance. And now more than ever, that's important. So, less twaddle, more focus is probably what we need.
I think the notion of that internal versus external is quite interesting, right, as well, because I think a brand that looks after and respects its employees first and foremost is something that people naturally want to believe in, because if they look after their own, if you like, you then as a human feel like they can look after your needs as well. And I don't think necessarily, every brand, I don't want to call brands out either, has necessarily transmitted that over the last kind of 12 to 14 months. And that means there's probably a repair job to be done internally around employee engagement, as you quite rightly pointed out. So, that probably puts them a little bit behind brands within their competitive set by, nothing other than how and what action they've taken. It's an interesting perspective. I just want to jump in, and everybody will probably ask you this because I know you talk quite widely about your time at RBS, because those of us that have been UK based for a significant amount of time will remember RBS in 2008 and the financial crisis there. You joined in 2015, so some way after the financial crisis. What was the sentiment around the brand in 2015? Had it recovered reputationally? And then what do recovery steps look like? What did you see when you walked in?
Well, first of all, I had, and certainly looking back, I consider this the immense privilege of being on gardening leave before I started. So I could look at the brand from the outside and look at the data and form an opinion before I actually was deluged with, the internal machinations that all corporations have. And what the data showed, that RBS was the least trusted brand in the least trusted sector, caused by 2008, but continued into 2015. As our wonderful chairman famously said, you can't revive a dead brand. And actually job number one was to stand and look at what RBS was. And what RBS was a failed attempt at building a global brand. If you actually looked at where it came from, which is the Royal Bank of Scotland in Scotland. The Royal Bank of Scotland, on the other hand, which happens to be what customers who bank there call the Royal Bank, wasn't that bad. So we did the brand strategy, separating out the customer-facing brands, and not rocket science to this, by focusing on the customer, focusing on the data, doing things like they should be done. So telling the truth, particularly in corporate affairs, because we had the biggest legacy to sort out in terms of fines and legislative things, and that's not an easy thing to pick through. You do that by picking through, telling the truth, focusing on your customers, and meanwhile the brand has indeed recovered. Ironically, as I look at the data today, RBS, even though we withdrew that as the operating company name and are shifting to the NatWest Group, RBS is suddenly leapt up to be the most trusted of banking brands, and that's a lot to do with the great work that the bank are doing in Scotland. So the headquarters of the Royal Bank at Gogarburn is now the Royal Food Bank for Scotland. It's been opened up for that. So you can shift trust by doing the right thing, but you have to be realistic about what the data tells you.
Yeah, I remember I was at the Financial Times actually when we were going through 2008, and I think the business still does it. They used to run kind of brand image surveys across the financial sector, and actually what you saw was the whole sector shift down. So it wasn't a case of RBS was the only one isolated amongst its peer group. There's reputational damage across everybody involved in the banking sector in 2008, which took some time to recover, for sure. But it kind of shows you that, I guess, RBS was, I think, 1727. Have I got that date right in terms of inception? Well
done. Almost 300 years old. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, right. And how quickly brand equity can be lost when it's got a 280 years worth of, pretty solid growth history that's built trust. So I guess consumers, I don't know whether consumers are fickle or not fickle, but they certainly react quite quickly, which kind of takes me to Philippa and the journal. The journal has been producing consumer confidence reports for, I guess, the last 3 to 4 months, which have been fairly indicative of how market sentiment is. Philippa, do you guys look at, how do you use the reports? What do they say? And then how do you translate what is in those reports in terms of advice you can then give to the partners and brands that you work with?
Sure. And first of all, thank you very much for having me today. So let me quickly start with the why do we do those reports. And I don't think there's anyone on this show so far who hasn't said, you have to focus on the consumer, right? We have to know what people are thinking. So in short, our advertising customers need this, right? They need to know what is, the journal is very much a bellwether of what the C-suite is thinking, of what decision makers in America, but more broadly as well, are thinking, and how messaging is likely to land, how they're viewing advertisers, but also what's happening in their spending behavior, and what kind of decisions are they making, because these are the guys who will be shaping the economy of the future in many respects, right? And when you've got marketers who are fighting hard for every dollar of discretionary spending, you need to make sure that they know what kind of environment they're going into. That's the simple answer. The more complicated answer is, look, this has been there has not been a recession since the Second World War. And Damien, you referred to this at the beginning, that has been based on this kind of factor, right? This is a global societal shock. And what we understood pretty early on, and I think probably everybody sort of got to grips with this, is that the underlying factors of this crisis were going to change over time, right? So 3 months ago, we might have been on one of these calls discussing how you deal with a fragmented workforce and how you keep company culture alive, etc. Now we're dealing with a very, very different problem, right? We were always talking about trust being at a pretty low point, not in the media, but across government, society in general, media included, and organizations. I'd say we are now in such a febrile environment that has almost kind of 10x'd. And so we need to really keep track of what sentiment looks like as the sort of underlying vibe changes from, I guess, where we started with skepticism and a sort of a general lack of confidence, to fear when jobs started being wiped out, and the health crisis really started taking its toll, to what is now frustration and anger, and in the midst of a global pandemic, right, for which there is still really no solution. We're kind of we're sort of trying to get there with technological solutions, etc. And science is working rapidly to try and fix this, but we're not there yet. And we're about to enter an election in the US. Looks like we are making preparations for a no-deal Brexit, and the US and China are fighting over Hong Kong and what's happening there. We are in this it's a sort of, it's a perfect storm where trust, which we, I think it was fair to say when we talk about trust and we look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, we were kind of seeing a little sort of incremental shifts to the positive in that respect. Mm-hmm. I would say that is now we're going to be just in a very different scenario, certainly on a societal level. So we really need to know the temperature of people in this environment, right? So I think that, helping our advertisers at least have some confidence in what this environment looks like, and what kind of conversations they need to be having, because they need to be having those conversations. Yeah. We've all said it. It's a pretty binary choice in this environment, right? You talk or you don't talk, you communicate or you don't communicate. And we know that the upside of communication is all there in the data, in the historical data, that says if you continue to spend now, you're going to see upside in revenue. And yes, it's hard to fight for discretionary spending when you've got, your staff are being laid off or furloughed. So how do you navigate that very difficult balancing act? So I'll just give you some of the results of our most recent, because I think that it's really telling. And I know that we've had, we've all had conversations about what does the shape of the recovery look like? Is it a V? Is it a swoosh? Is it a W, etc.? I think, no one knows is probably the answer. And the markets are almost not the best indicator of the way the economy is going, because the two things they don't necessarily move in lockstep. So, latest survey, optimism about the economy is growing. Fantastic. Over half of respondents, and this was over 1,000 respondents across the Wall Street Journal and Barron's Group, expect the economy to get better in the next 3 months. And that's a 22 percentage point gain from mid-March. So that's sort of heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
There is an anticipated increase in expenditure on personal goods and travel. You can probably see why. People have been in lockdown for a while, right? And they're just waiting for that kind of for the lockdown to come off so they can get out there and start spending and going to restaurants. Priorities are shifting, with a stronger emphasis on the health of the economy, as you might expect. In sort of, without navel gazing too much, the Wall Street Journal is ranked as one of the most trusted sources of accurate COVID-19 information. That's nearly 3 times higher than other news outlets, which is fantastic for us and testament to the work that the newsroom's been doing. Businesses still have expansion plans, and most are still able to access cash and are optimistic about their financial outlook. And then one last stat to throw in, 83% of Wall Street Journal respondents and 79% of Barron's respondents said they see brands that advertise in our titles as trustworthy. So for us, really, this is a chance, and we've talked about it. We've talked about authenticity and we've talked about utility. I think at the very least, those are 2 of the words that have come up so far. We are helping brands, and maybe we can come on to this later, but we help brands to tell stories we've been talking about authenticity for years. I mean, it's not, trust and the journal are words that go hand in hand. We're helping them get to that point, whether that's in white glove treatment, in content marketing and storytelling, and using our commercial side journalists to help discover and tell authentic stories, or whether it's in our programmatic led advertising, where we've invested a huge amount in ad tech, proprietary ad tech that gets your message to the right audience in the right way and makes you feel kind of like completely safe in a brand suitable environment. So long story short, this is not an environment that's shut down. I'd say, having covered the markets for years, it's going to be a really volatile recovery. And there are going to be lots of more turns of the news cycle before we get there. But this is an environment where people are looking for brands to talk to them, not necessarily to sell to them, but to talk to them and to demonstrate some value, and leadership.
Yeah, that goes, values. I think value is the key word. I was reading yesterday that, it's cost $20 trillion in GDP growth, $17 trillion invested in recovery packages globally. That's a significant number when you combine it. So it's not going to be easy, right? Moving forward. But I also read that there's $5 trillion sitting on the sidelines ready to be invested. So there are opportunities for brands to step in if they can make the right move, and if they can show their clients that they have the spirit of generosity and they have a value proposition that fits the cycle that we're in right now. And I just wanted to kind of explore this notion of brand behavior, because advertising and marketing communications is something that I genuinely look forward to, whether that's Nike at the World Cup football, or the Super Bowl halftimes, or John Lewis at Christmas. Are we ready to be entertained again? And David, you've got the benefit of being a conscientious objector. Are we ready to be entertained again?
I think so. I mean, so on the one hand, I think people have had enough of "we're all in this together, we're with you every step of the way" type communication.
Yeah.
Has looked pretty inauthentic from many that have delivered it. But if I pick out a couple of things, KFC, I think in the UK have done a lovely job when they were encouraging people to make their own KFC while they were shut down and post them on social media.
Yeah.
They would then comment. And actually, what was delicious about that is they were then relatively insulting to people's poor efforts. But when they could then open again, they celebrated that. And actually, you've only got to look at the social media feeds to see how much that was appreciated, because they understand their market, they got the tone right, and they were sensitive to what was happening, because everybody likes to get their takeout when they can. Obviously, Tesco have done a fantastic job here, and if you go back, seems a very long while ago, but when Easter, they were still doing food love recipes and having Granny's favourite lamb done by each member of the family in their own house using this kind of technology to put an ad together. And I remember sitting watching that thinking, so that would have taken a lot more blood, sweat and tears to do than it did to watch, but full of admiration for that. But there is quite a lot of twaddle. I won't have the bad grace to talk about the twaddle, but those that are getting the tone right and thinking about it, I think are doing well. And as we move into this next phase of lockdown light, going to be really interesting to see how people respond to that, because this is a time when we need to remember communication is key. I'll try and avoid the political side of this, but some of the communication we've had hasn't been as crisp and clear as it might be, and brands have a good role in doing that. So let's see what emerges.
Louisa, Maersk kind of having a B2B face, if you like. How much do you think about tone, and how much do you think about brand personality? Is that right in a B2B sense?
Of course it is. It absolutely is. I mean, in a B2B world, often the purchase that you make has a significantly bigger impact, and there are many more commoditized products in a B2B world. And also, I must say, I grew up in a B2C world, and there's no doubt that I've taken those learnings in. I completely agree with all the comments that were been made right now about authenticity and value and things like that. And I think for Maersk, in the past, Maersk had a perception of being reliable, and you could set your clock depending on when the vessels would appear in a port. That got consciously down prioritized to optimization and standardization to run an effective business in the 90s. And when we shaped the new strategy, it was very clear that we needed a different brand to enable that growth. And we landed on being trusted, open, and brave. And it's funny how many times trusted has come up as a word here, and how conscious we were in not saying reliable as before, but trusted. And there's a big difference between not saying we will tell you exactly when the vessel will be there, but you can trust us to find the right solution for you.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a couple of things coming through in terms of question, and brave is a word that I'm seeing people tweeting. I think mostly consumers want brands to be a bit brave, and I think we'll try and answer this question when we come off about when's the right time to be brave and who makes that call, because you get it wrong and then you can go 2 to 3 steps backwards.
Yeah, but I think that the point of being brave does not mean you're foolish. It means that you take responsibility for what you can solve. And we have an ability to play a massive role in, as said, enabling global trade and fueling prosperity around the world. If you cut off those supplies, it has devastating impact on the world. So being brave is also just taking that responsibility and doing what you can. I would say the whole notion of the combination of open and brave is also being honest that there are certain things we do with the strongest belief that they're the right things, but we also admit our failures when they happen. Yeah, and that's why when we went to market over about a year ago now, with our big positioning of all the way, it's a mindset, it's a commitment to go wider within logistics, but it was a piece of communication that spoke to choosing change. We were not saying we can solve all your problems for you, but we say we had looked inside and we have had that debate in our brain of should the incumbent drive the change, and are we willing to choose change? And
Yeah.
and we're going to follow that up in not so long with a new message of connecting the world in new ways. And we have really looked at when is the right time to go out and say that. And we have pushed it slightly, but we haven't pushed it very far out, because we believe we have a responsibility to be part of the answer.
Yeah.
And just last point on this is throughout COVID, we need to remember that the world moves not at the same pace. So we also have to be there for the customers who are ready actually to buy, be it in China, who's opening up first, or who actually have an increased business because it's an e-com business, and actually now they have increased logistics needs, which they didn't have before. So it's about finding people where they are in the customer journey and being more effective with our automated data-triggered journeys, while being very respectful in the mass communication.
Yeah, I think that notion, if you've got a strong e-commerce business, again, we're going back to, accelerated digital transformation. You've got the opportunity to still make and ship product to consumers that want it. So that still exists, because we still, as humans, I think, want to buy things that make us feel good, particularly at times where we can't get that endorphin rush outside in the same way that we used to be able to prior to going in, which is really interesting. But the two things that say that, like, data's a funny one, because it feels like a conversation we've been having in the last 4 or 5 years. Data informing how brave you can be feels like an oxymoron if you put those two things together. So Gordana, because I think agencies have been using data really, well to inform strategy. I saw an article written by, I think, Mediacom's US chief strat officer that said, it almost been kind of misinforming clients, or he felt that he'd been informing clients for the last 3 to 4 years, and we've become too data centric. Where's that conversation at right now, when a lot of what we're doing is based on feel and hunch, good, strong human emotions and intuition?
Look, I think that's interesting. We could talk about this for hours. I think you're right. There is a strong argument that we have now entered what Theodore Leavitt once, 1960s, explained, called marketing myopia, right? When everything, I think that's where we slightly got very close to, especially before COVID times, that data was suddenly the holy grail of everything that we do. And I think, at Havas, I'm now talking about our realization was that obviously data is a means to an end, that in order to inform our clients and be really trusted advisor to their business objectives and their KPIs, we definitely need to combine the arts and the data science, which is listening to what our consumers are telling us. It's the heart and it's a head, together with the right data, not any data, but right data. And that balance is actually the key to successful planning, to successful consumer engagement, to meaningful experience, which is what we are really genuinely trying to, it's our proposal to our clients. It's that meaningful experience in order to create the meaningful brands. Because without that, really, we are always pedaling around the same old propositions, where now, especially during the COVID times, the other themes that we are now uncovering, which we need to address through data, but through the heart also, is the whole theme of solidarity, right? More involvement in the social issues from the brands. Localization, this is another thing that we are sort of seeing strongly. It's the rise of national independence, and also sustainability, right? And people see this as a rehearsal for the climate change. And I think data can give us the right inputs and right prompts, but we really do need to use all other elements of our us as a consumers, as a media and marketing practitioners, to put it all together.
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting point in time. But interesting is probably the wrong word, actually. But I think you get my sentiment in that there's a lot happen. There was a lot happening before we went into COVID. You know, the refocusing on SDG goals, what does sustainability look like, the equality conversation that is, you know, should be front of everybody's agenda. That just doesn't seem to, you know, have been spoken about in the media for the last 3 months because we've been focused on elsewhere. And Philippa, you know, I'll put my brand hat on as well. You know, in many ways, for organisations like ours, we've seen this has been a growth story, right? Audience numbers are really strong, engagement is really strong, but that doesn't necessarily translate to increased partnerships because of the way the economics work. So, you know, how do you go out talking to clients, you know, about capitalising on the positive growth signs we see across our, you know, across our media properties?
I'd say, like, I think for us, it comes down to expressing utility in every other, in sort of in exactly the same way that we would talk to our brand partners about expressing utility, right? We know that at the Journal, our utility is trust and to provide facts in an era of misinformation. That's it, right? That we are, and of course, that role is never more important than it is in a time like this.
Yeah.
So that kind of, like, in a way, for our subscriptions business, fantastic, right? Eyeballs and unique viewers over the first 3 months up 75% compared to the whole second half of last year. In the US, up 100%. In the UK, up 75%. In Europe, you know, the readership is there. It's coming. It's flocking. And, you know, and I know why we deserve that. As somebody, I was a newsroom journalist for more than 10 years at the Wall Street Journal, so I know why we deserve that role. Is like, it's incredibly tough environment as a journalist, and it's brilliant, and we totally, like, deserve to be there because we put the hard yards in.
Yeah.
Now, how do we take that forward to our clients, right, and say that this is not just a safe and suitable environment for you, and we have the readers and we have the C-suite and there's lots of readers, so, you know, come work with us. It's much deeper than that. And this comes down to a lot of the work, the advisory work we do at the Trust. And again, on this notion of utility and advisory. So in our capacity as consultants to our clients, a lot of what we do is really ask our clients, and we work with them on this because it's hard to do this when you're inside an organization. You do need, oftentimes you need the outside to come in and help you with this. But to go back and look at what the core of your mission is, right? This is beyond just, I want to talk about social values like diversity and sustainability, because we know that lots of people want to talk about those things, and they have, you know, they have a lot to say. If you were setting up your company today, in light of everything you know about the world, how would you do it? What would your priorities be in the way that you communicate yourself to the world? How would you express your value in a way that provides education and is edifying and sort of boils down the essence of what that utility is in the world? And, you know, I've heard in some cases this, especially sort of on a sort of, you know, personal coaching level, this described as, what is your indelible mark, right? What is a function of you exists in the world that only you can provide?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, coming back to the notion of, is this a time to be brave? I don't think that this is really, I think that if you get that utility and purpose right, you can go out there and be brave. You can go out there and tell your story because you've done the groundwork and you figured out what gives you the right as a brand to exist in this world, and what brings value to the consumers that you should be absolutely laser focused on. And one of the ways we do this is we'll work with brands to, I use a program based on Stanford D School thinking, human-centered design. We look at not just who your personas are, right, and break them into kind of like buckets, but we actually go into sort of like, we unpick their lives, we look at their pain points, we look at their points of vulnerability, and figure out how only your brand can solve those points of vulnerability. So you're not even starting with, what products or services as a brand do you have, and how can you express them in the world, but what pain points do your consumers have? And that's B2B and B2C. and how can you as a brand solve for them? And that's where you start to sort of seed your utility, and that's where you start to be able to tell really brave brand stories that are totally authentic, and that show your leadership as well, right? And that are relevant for all stakeholders, internal workforces, external clients, etc. So I think, you know, that is where we bring a certain element of sort of the journalistic discoverability to the table as well, right? Is by having journalists working on the sales side, we can help you really pick apart your story, your value proposition, yourselves, and present it to the world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've always kind of looked at it in a, you know, you got to, first of all, you got to earn the right to be at the table, and that doesn't come overnight. And then you've got to understand why you're at the table, and then make sure you don't fall in with everybody else, because if you've earned the right to be at the table, the people want to hear from you. So, you know, to David's point earlier, you know, every TV spot that we've seen, you know, in the last 3 months, it starts with an apology, moves through "we'll be with you till the end," and then leaves you with a, you know, a gentle cuddle. But we want to go back into being.
Damien, add a comment.
What's that?
I said, can I add a comment?
Yeah, of course you can. Of course you can.
No, I agree with everything that's being said now. I just think, as a client on the call, I do also think it's really important to bear in mind that our CEOs and board members of the world right now are being bombarded with information. And if it is not about tweaking your strategy and executing it more in a more agile manner, and you actually need a fundamental U-turn, I think there's also a task of how does one create headspace for the leaders to take the right decisions at this point in time. There are new pressures that people have not experienced before, and factors and complexity that simply just not sit in most people's experience. So I do think while all of these things are right, there is a fundamental premise of all leaders at all kinds of level to support their leadership, to get the headspace to steer this in the right way.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we're talking about Zoom calls gone wrong before everybody else joined us. Audiences tend to, you know, I think they do tend to be more forgiving now, because they've seen the human side of the last 3 months as well, and they realise that not everybody gets things right all the time. And I think showing, you know, that side of ourselves and that side of businesses is a warm characteristic that takes, you know, the gloss off the big corporate world. I think that's something that hopefully, you know, we can take moving forward. I'm going to get.
I think, Damien, I think to that point, if I may interrupt, that being humble and understanding your corporate position, being able to articulate it nicely in a way that actually is meaningful to consumer, I think that's the key, right? That's what we are discussing here. Just an example of O2, for example, one of our clients, they haven't been shouting around how wonderful they are and connecting us all when they are. What they've done, they've actually given people free access to sites that they, without using their data connections, giving them a free Disney Plus as a part of their package off. Then they were, you know, for NHS workers, they gave them a, you know, free data provider solution. So, I mean, it's being concrete. That's what we are discussing here, and in a bit more humble way, rather than shouting and adjusted, you know. But then some of our clients, like FMCG, because of their proximity to consumer, it's much easier to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Than when you're actually sitting far removed from the consumer itself.
Cool. Before Alex shouts at me, and I was going to ask you a couple more questions, but I'm going to leave them where they're at right now and try and push together a theme that's coming from 3 or 4 questions in our audience. I think what we're saying here is we don't know what new normal looks like because it changes so frequently. And actually, since David and I spoke, which I think was Tuesday last week, you know, the situation in the US is, you know, has just changed beyond recognition. And, you know, we're about to go into a pretty polarized US election cycle, I think. So we got a combination of factors that include, a global pandemic, healthcare crisis, humanitarian. We're likely to go through a pretty deep recession in the next, 6 to 9 months. We've got Brexit in the background. We've got a US election cycle that goes through to November. How far, I'm trying to work out what the question is, how far should brands be looking, and how far can they plan right now, given the short-term nature of the news cycle? Is it possible to see beyond 3, 4, 5 months? And that's open to anybody. So I'd love an opinion from everybody, actually.
I'll go ahead,
David.
No, ladies first, please.
Ladies first, absolutely.
Thank you. I think there is, yes, a degree of nimbleness is needed, but if you get the message right to begin with, then none of what you've just said is not interlinked. Everything that we're experiencing in the world is the same crisis, right? That there is, we are having protests in the US because we have a polarized political system, and because there are huge structural inequalities that are absolutely not new. None of this is new. None of this should come as a surprise. I mean, it is shocking, but it shouldn't be surprising. And I think that if you get the message right, and what I keep thinking about as well as utility is education and edification. If you can strike out in the world thinking about those two things, when you're thinking about your brand messaging, however it pertains to you, right? Those things will mean such different things to different people.
Yeah.
But if you sort of use that as your North Star, you should be able to get through with a pretty evergreen message. I mean, unless you're, offering very specific help at a very specific point. Yeah. So I would say get the underlying aspects right, and be prepared to be, like a reed in the wind up to a point, like with you in terms of, being flexible, but you need to sort of get the fundamentals right.
David?
Yeah, I mean, I think a build on that is, we would have all been familiar with the zoom in, zoom out, so have a long-term view, 3-5 years out and do the next 90 days. That's probably all shrunk now, but I would add here the note of pragmatism. We don't have a TV owner on here, but there's things like booking deadlines and media commitments, and actually there's some pragmatism that we need to bear in mind as we do this. But as I listen to CMOs and what they're doing, on the whole, it's a kind of 30-day rolling plan with a 90-day horizon, and financially that kind of works for most people, because beyond that, how would you know? And what you don't want to do is waste people's time in endless meetings that are replanning what you're going to do in the next 6 months, because who knows? So, and I also observe a massive amount of time being wasted doing exactly that. So, zoom in tight on 30 days, be flexible and pragmatic, and remember the humility point, because I think that's crucial, and partnerships too, because media owners need to work with clients, and in the spirit of partnership that's often been missing. But it's nice to see that popping back up again. So let's hope it continues.
Cool. I think I've tried to pull together a couple of questions from, I see Alison's written in, I need Bruce written in also, so I think that covers both of those. Louisa, how far ahead are you thinking?
Well, I mean, we do think quite far, because it's such a fundamental transformation we are undertaking right now. But we do optimize our business on a very, very short-term cycle. Parts of it we do weekly, and that's where we have enough traffic, and we do adapt that. Our, let's say, next level of relevance and value proposition solution communication, probably you're right about the 3 months. But our brand architecture and our repositioning, it's a 3 to 5 year, in some instances 8 years. So we actually do operate on all kinds of levels. But I would say we are not wavering away from our vision of moving the brand to be able to connect and simplify our customer supply chain. And that's not an overnight turn.
Yeah, I think, when you look back, we've seen David and I again talked about it last week. Brands that have built their equity. We talked about M&S, David, I think, through the Second World War, right? That remains in our psyche because of the role they played in amongst, huge disruption, and, become a core part of what you trust and how you trust, because they've delivered from year on in. Gordana, do you see that across the agency group generally in terms of cyclically timelines are shortened?
Yes, very much so. But then again, as I said earlier, as long as we understand what is the strategic framework that we are operating, what are the key things that we need to adhere to, and from our side is ensuring the brand safety for our clients, meaningful experience throughout the whole the consumer journey. I think we are used to, as a media agencies, to work with our clients very closely. As their business changes, we have to change, and we have as partners like yourselves, and it's our job to deliver to those business priorities. So I think for us, to be honest with you, it's almost, yeah, we're looking forward to that V-shaped recovery, but used to dynamic ways of working.
You've led me very nicely into giving you some results on the poll that we started at the top around optimism, and I'm seeing that it's actually relatively well split across everything. We got 37% of people responded being optimistic, 40% being pessimistic, and 24% being unsure. And I think that signifies where we're at right now, right? It's equal, and I think everything's to play for. And I think depending on what the news cycle looks like, we bounce between optimistic one day and pessimistic the next day. So, you know, we've got to try and help navigate our clients and our own businesses through what is a period that we just haven't experienced before. And sometimes remember when it's tough to realize that nobody's experienced it before. And we're all humans, and we will make mistakes as we go through. But ultimately, we'll get judged on motive, I think, and generosity, like we talked about in the webinar right up front 2.5 months ago. So I'm going to hand it back to Alex. And as she said up front, we will get back to any questions that have come through that we've not been able to cover. So leave that with us, and we'll do it as quickly as we can. Thank you, everybody. I've enjoyed it. And again, thanks for your time. Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Damon. Thank you, everyone. Just a fascinating discussion that I think we could have gone on for another half an hour easily. I mean, for me, the key takeouts to survive in the post-COVID-19 world, brands need to carry on being authentic. You know, it's a word that keeps coming back into our world, meaningful and add value. Customer focus, Louise, is absolutely key. Without that, you've got no roadmap. My quote has to be David's: less twaddle, more focus. I love that. Trust is so important, but you've got to earn it. So it's really important that you do the right thing. And communication is key for all these brands. But they've got to be bold and strike the right balance. Otherwise, if they don't get the right tone, the damage can be evident. So much takeaway, lots of food for thought. Thank you all individually for your contribution and giving us your time, especially when you're so busy. So huge thanks to the panel. And Damien, brilliant. Thank you for doing so well. And we are shaping the next series of our smart briefing. So that will be communicated shortly alongside another new initiative that will come in the autumn. So thank you everybody for joining. Stay safe, and we'll speak again soon. Goodbye.
See you guys.
Thank you.